My brother Caleb texted, "Don't come to the barbecue this weekend. Lauren says you'll destroy the party." I stared at those words like they were fire, burning through 15 years of loyalty in a single second. Stay with me as I tell you how one message changed everything. And if this story speaks to you, show your support by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. I was sitting in my car after a long night shift at the hospital when the text came in. My hands still smelled like sanitizer. My head still buzzed from alarms and patient calls. I read the message once, then again, hoping I misunderstood. But the words didn't change. My own brother didn't want me at a family barbecue. Not because he was busy. Not because space was tight. But because his wife said I would destroy it. I'm Delaney. I'm 32 years old, and I've been a nurse for almost a decade. I've seen people at their worst and held hands during their last breaths. I know pain. But this hit differently. This wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, sharp, and personal. Lauren never liked me. From the first time Caleb brought her home, she watched me like I was a problem she hadn't figured out how to solve yet. Still, she had always been polite. Distant, but polite. This was the first time she was cruel out loud. What hurt most was that Caleb didn't soften the message. He didn't explain. He didn't call. He just sent the words and let them sit there between us, heavy and final. 15 years earlier, our parents died in a car crash. I was 17. Caleb was 10. Overnight, I became more than a sister. I became the one who cooked, worked, signed papers, and stayed up worrying about money. I put off my own plans so he could have a future. I never reminded him of that. I never wanted thanks. I just thought it meant something. I sat there in the car, phone in my lap, feeling small in a way I hadn't felt since I was a teenager, pretending not to be scared. Part of me wanted to text back something angry. Another part wanted to block his number and disappear completely. I imagined not answering calls, not showing up, letting them believe whatever story they wanted about me. But then something inside me shifted. Not anger exactly. More like clarity. If Lauren thought I would destroy a party, she must already believe I was dangerous in some way. That didn't come from nowhere. And Caleb didn't defend me. That meant there was more going on than one barbecue. I wiped my eyes, started the car, and drove home. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't crying. I was thinking. I wasn't going to beg for an invitation. I wasn't going to vanish quietly either. If I was being pushed out of my own family, I wanted to know why. And this time, I wasn't going to look away. That text didn't end our relationship. It cracked it open. And what I saw inside changed how I saw my brother forever. When I look back now, everything makes more sense when I start at 17. That was the age my life split in two. One day, I was worrying about classes and dorm applications. The next, I was standing in a hospital hallway, holding my little brother's hand, being told our parents weren't coming back from a car crash. Caleb was 10. He kept asking when Mom would wake up. I didn't cry until later, when he finally fell asleep against my shoulder. From that moment on, I stopped being just his sister. I became the person who had to make decisions, even when I didn't feel old enough to make any. I gave up college without telling many people. I told myself I could go later. First, I worked mornings at a grocery store, then nights cleaning offices. I learned how to stretch a paycheck and pretend I wasn't exhausted. I packed Caleb's lunches, helped with homework, and sat through parent-teacher meetings where people looked at me with pity. I smiled anyway. When he got into high school, I picked up extra shifts so he could play sports. When college acceptance letters came, I cried in the bathroom so he wouldn't see how scared I was about money. I paid the deposits, signed the loans, and told him to focus on his future. I didn't think of it as sacrifice. I thought of it as love. Lauren entered his life during his last year of college. The first time we met, she was polite but distant, like she was already tired of me. She spoke to Caleb softly, but looked at me like I was an obstacle. I tried to be welcoming. I invited her to dinner, asked about her job, laughed at her jokes. None of it seemed to matter. After they started dating seriously, things shifted. Caleb stopped calling as much. Visits became shorter. When I asked how he was doing, his answers sounded rehearsed, like he was careful not to say too much. Lauren always seemed nearby, listening. When they got married, the distance grew wider. I was invited, but I felt like a guest instead of family. After that, the calls slowed to holidays. Then just texts. Sometimes weeks went by without hearing from him. I told myself this was normal. People grow up. People move on. But the way Lauren spoke about me stung. She joked that I was intense or too involved. She said it with a smile, but the words stuck. I began to feel like my presence annoyed her, like my history with Caleb was something she wanted erased. I started noticing how easily I was left out. Plans made without me. Photos shared after the fact. Decisions Caleb used to talk through with me were suddenly none of my business. His life was moving forward, and I was being edited out quietly. At night, I replayed old memories. Him falling asleep on the couch while I studied bills, him hugging me when he graduated. I wondered how someone could forget all that so easily. The sadness sat heavy in my chest, but it didn't stay soft. Slowly, the hurt hardened. Not into rage, but into something sharper. I realized loyalty wasn't guaranteed by blood. I had given everything without keeping score, and somewhere along the way, that made me disposable. I wasn't just losing my brother. I was being replaced. And that truth settled in me like a cold resolve that wasn't going away. After the text, I didn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same question. Why now? Lauren had never liked me, but this felt bigger than personal dislike. It felt planned. By morning, I knew I needed answers, not guesses. There was only one person in the family who still spoke to me without hesitation, Aunt Rochelle. Rochelle had always been honest, sometimes painfully so. She lived a few towns over and never took sides just to keep the peace. When I called her, she didn't sound surprised. That alone made my stomach drop. She asked me to come over, said this wasn't something to talk about in quick sentences. We sat at her kitchen table with coffee growing cold between us. I told her about the text, about being uninvited, about how it made me feel like I'd imagined my place in the family all along. Rochelle listened without interrupting, her jaw tight. Then she sighed and told me the truth. Lauren had been talking. Not just once. Not just to one person. She had been telling relatives and mutual friends that I was unstable, that I got too emotional, that I had trouble letting go. She said I was intense in a way that made people uncomfortable. Hearing those words felt like being slapped without warning. I asked Rochelle how long this had been going on. She said it started soon after the wedding, but picked up over the last year. Lauren framed it like concern, like she was protecting Caleb from stress. She made it sound reasonable. That made it worse. Then Rochelle told me the part that hurt the most. Caleb hadn't stopped it. At a work event, someone mentioned me, and Caleb laughed it off. He repeated Lauren's words. Said I meant well, but could be a lot. He said it casually, like it was nothing. I felt something inside me go very still. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was my own brother helping shape a version of me that didn't exist. A version that made it easier to push me out. I thought back to moments I'd brushed off, awkward silences, sudden distance, people treating me differently. It wasn't in my head. A story had been written about me, and I hadn't even known it was being told. I asked Rochelle why she hadn't said anything sooner. She admitted she didn't want to cause trouble. She thought it would blow over. When she realized it wasn't, she didn't know how to bring it up without hurting me. I appreciated her honesty, but the damage was already done. I drove home feeling hollow at first. Then angry. Not explosive anger, but something colder and more controlled. Being uninvited to a barbecue was one thing. Having my character quietly destroyed was another. They hadn't just decided I didn't belong at a party. They decided I didn't belong in their version of the family at all. And they were laying the groundwork to make it look like my fault. That's when I made a choice. I wasn't going to cry to people who already believed the worst about me. I wasn't going to defend myself in whispers. And I wasn't going to disappear to make them comfortable. If they wanted to tell a story about me, then I would stop being silent. I wouldn't beg for a place anymore. I would stand up calm and clear, and let the truth speak for itself. I was done playing the victim. I went to town that weekend anyway. I didn't tell anyone except Aunt Rochelle. I didn't drive past the house where the barbecue was happening, didn't slow down, didn't look. I wasn't there to watch them celebrate without me. I was there because something felt unfinished, like there were answers waiting that I'd been too afraid to dig for before. I checked into a small motel near the old high school. Everything looked the same and smaller at the same time. The streets, the diner, the park where Caleb and I used to sit after school. I kept my visit quiet on purpose. I wanted space to think, not explanations or fake smiles. That afternoon, I met Beau. Beau had been part of our lives since we were kids. He lived 2 houses down and was always around, riding bikes with Caleb, crashing on our couch, eating whatever I cooked. When our parents died, Beau was the one who helped fix things around the house when money was tight. He stood beside Caleb as best man at the wedding. Then suddenly he disappeared from their lives. We met at a small grill on the edge of town. The kind of place where the booths are cracked and the smell of grease never leaves. Bo looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. When he saw me, his face softened, then tightened again like he was bracing himself. He told me Caleb stopped answering his calls a year ago. No fight. No explanation. Just silence. Lauren said Bo was a bad influence, whatever that meant. Caleb went along with it. Hearing that made my chest ache in a familiar way. We talked about small things at first. Work. Old neighbors. The weather. Then Bo leaned forward and asked if I really wanted to know why things fell apart. I said yes. That's when he told me. Years ago, when Caleb talked about medical school, I gave him money. Not a loan. A gift. I'd been saving it for emergencies, but I wanted him to have every chance I never took. He said it was for application fees, prep courses, and moving costs. I believed him. I never asked for proof. Bo told me that money never went to school. Instead, Caleb used it to buy Lauren's engagement ring. A big one. Then he used the rest to help pay for their honeymoon. A week-long trip I remembered seeing photos of, smiling faces I'd liked without a second thought. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the booth. Bo said he found out by accident when Caleb got drunk one night and bragged about making it work. Bo confronted him later. Caleb asked him to drop it. Then Lauren got involved. After that, Bo was cut off. I stared at the table, my hands shaking. That money came from nights I skipped sleep, from shifts I worked sick, from plans I postponed again and again. And they spent it on love and luxury, then painted me as unstable for wanting to stay connected. Suddenly, everything lined up. The distance. The guilt. The need to turn me into a problem. I thanked Bo and left before my anger spilled over. Sitting alone in my car, I finally understood. This wasn't one betrayal. It was a pattern. And once I saw it clearly, I knew I couldn't unsee it again. I didn't confront anyone. Not Caleb. Not Lauren. I knew better now. Confrontation would only give them time to twist the story again. Instead, I went quiet in a different way. I started looking back. I opened old email accounts I hadn't touched in years. I scrolled through messages from the time Caleb talked about medical school, the time he asked for help, the time I sent money without question. The dates lined up too neatly to ignore. Transfers made within days of his engagement. Withdrawals that matched the honeymoon timeline Bo described. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, laptop glowing in the dark, my chest tight as the truth stacked up in front of me. I found texts from Caleb thanking me for believing in him. Messages where he promised he'd pay it forward someday. I noticed what wasn't there. Any mention of tuition, applications, or school expenses. I had been careful with my words. He had been careful with his lies. Back home, I kept digging. I pulled bank statements from old files. I matched amounts. I highlighted dates. It wasn't just one transfer. It was several. Small enough at first not to scare me. Then larger ones when he said costs were higher than expected. Every time I trusted him. Then I found something that made my hands go cold. An old email chain between Caleb and Lauren, saved in a shared account he once used on my computer. I don't think he ever realized it synced. In it, Lauren joked about how lucky he was to have a sister who would do anything for him. She knew exactly where the money came from. She knew what it was meant for. And she was fine spending it anyway. That hurt more than the money itself. I kept reading. I found messages where Lauren complained about me. She said I was too attached, too involved, that I made it hard for Caleb to fully commit to their marriage. When I texted him to check in, she called it clingy. When I asked why he hadn't visited, she called it emotional manipulation. She used words that sounded thoughtful and concerned, the kind people believe without question. Worse, Caleb didn't push back. He agreed. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes outright. I realized then how carefully they had been shaping this version of me. Every caring message, every attempt to stay connected, had been twisted into proof that I was the problem. It made their choices easier. It made their guilt lighter. I started documenting everything. Screenshots. Copies. Dates. I saved files and folders labeled simply and clearly. Not out of panic, but control. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I didn't post anything. I didn't hint. This wasn't about embarrassment or public revenge. I didn't want applause or sympathy. I wanted something quieter and stronger. As the pieces came together, my anger settled into focus. This wasn't just about being uninvited or lied about. It was about being used, then erased. About having my love turned into a weakness. I closed my laptop and sat in the silence. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't shaking. I felt steady. Whatever I did next wouldn't be loud. But it would be exact. I waited 3 days before I texted Caleb back. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted my words to be clean. No anger. No explanation. No space for argument. When I finally sent it, the message was short. "You're right. I won't come. But soon I'll see you." He didn't reply. That silence told me more than any argument ever could. He was relieved. Maybe nervous. Either way, he understood there was something unfinished between us, even if he didn't know what shape it would take. Aunt Rochelle called me the next evening. She had that careful tone she used when she knew she was about to hand me a piece of information that mattered. She told me Lauren's father was being honored at a public community event in 2 weeks. A fundraiser dinner with local leaders, extended family, and business owners. Caleb was scheduled to give a short speech. The perfect picture of a supportive husband and devoted son-in-law. I thanked her and hung up, my mind already moving. I wasn't interested in revenge that screamed. I didn't want to storm in or confront anyone under bright lights. I didn't want to be dragged away or turned into proof that I was unstable. That's what they expected. That's what they'd prepared people to believe. What I wanted was presence. I reached out quietly, carefully. I called relatives I trusted, ones who remembered the years after the accident, who knew how close Caleb and I used to be. I didn't accuse. I didn't rant. I just said I'd be attending the event and that there were things they might want to understand before drawing conclusions. I contacted a few mutual friends too, people who had slowly faded out of my life at the same time Bo had. I noticed how many of them sounded surprised to hear from me, like they'd been told I didn't want contact anymore. I let that sink in without correcting it right away. When I called Bo, he didn't hesitate. He said he'd be there. His voice carried the same quiet resolve I felt in my own chest. It helped to know I wasn't alone in this anymore. I didn't spread rumors. I didn't share documents. I didn't even tell the full story. I just planted a simple truth with a few people I trusted. You should hear what really happened. That was it. Each call felt like laying another piece of kindling. Not for a fire meant to burn everything down, but for one that would finally give light. I wasn't trying to turn people against Caleb and Lauren. I was letting the truth stand close enough to be seen. In the quiet moments between calls, doubt crept in. I asked myself if this made me just as manipulative as they said I was. But the difference was simple. I wasn't lying. I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't hiding. For years, I had carried the weight of keeping the peace, of staying silent so no one would feel uncomfortable. That silence had cost me my place in my own family. Now, I was choosing something else. By the time the event date circled on my calendar, I felt steady. Not excited. Not afraid. Just ready. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't be built on whispers or misunderstandings. It would be built on truth. The room was full by the time I arrived. White tablecloths, soft music, polite laughter. Everything about the event was designed to look warm and respectable. I stayed near the back, close enough to see, but far enough not to draw attention. I didn't want an entrance. I wanted observation. Caleb took the stage when his name was called. He looked confident, well-dressed, smiling the way he always did in public. He talked about family values, about gratitude, about how proud he was to stand beside his wife and honor her father. People nodded along. Some even clapped before he finished his sentences. Then his eyes found me. It was brief, but I saw it clearly. His voice faltered. Just a second too long between words. He adjusted the microphone, laughed it off, and kept going, but the rhythm was gone. He rushed the rest of the speech, skipped a line or two, and stepped down sooner than planned. Most people didn't notice. I did. Afterward, the room loosened. People stood in small circles, drinks in hand. That's when the quiet movement began. Bo spoke to one person, then another. Aunt Rochelle joined a different group. I didn't say anything at first. I just listened. I heard my name whispered. I heard pauses where people processed what they were hearing. Faces changed. Eyebrows lifted. A few people glanced in my direction, not with judgment but curiosity. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked angry, though I wasn't sure at whom. No one raised their voice. No one accused. The truth moved softly, passed from one conversation to the next, steady and undeniable. Caleb found me near the side exit. He asked if we could talk privately. His tone was controlled, but his eyes gave him away. We stepped into a quieter corner, away from the crowd. He started by telling me I'd hurt him. He said my timing was cruel, that this night wasn't about me, that I should have respected his boundaries. He said Lauren's parents were stressed enough without family drama. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I nodded once. Then I spoke. I told him I never planned to speak publicly. I told him I hadn't shared anything that wasn't true. I reminded him of the money, the dates, the purpose he gave for it. I reminded him of the messages. I reminded him that silence had been his choice long before this night. He tried to say he was young, that he didn't know how to handle the pressure, that Lauren needed support, that I should understand. I told him understanding didn't erase accountability. I said I didn't show up to embarrass him. I showed up because I wouldn't let lies define me anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't asking for anything. I was just done pretending. He asked what I wanted. His voice cracked when he said it. I told him the truth didn't need permission. And I walked away before he could say anything else. As I stepped back into the room, the noise felt distant. People kept talking. Plates were cleared. Life moved on. But something had shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. The cracks were there now. And everyone could see them. I was halfway across the parking lot when I heard my name. Caleb's voice echoed sharper out here, stripped of the polite tone he used inside. I didn't turn right away. I unlocked my car, placed my bag on the seat, and only then faced him. The night air was cold. The building behind us glowed with soft lights and quiet music, like nothing important was happening at all. He looked frantic now. His tie was loose, his hands shaking. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Do you have any idea what you've started?" I told him calmly that I hadn't started anything. I had just stopped hiding it. That's when everything spilled out. I told him about the money. Every transfer. Every date. I told him I remembered working double shifts, telling myself it was temporary, believing his future mattered more than my comfort. I reminded him what he said the money was for. I reminded him how easily he lied. How easily he let Lauren spend it. He tried to interrupt. I didn't let him. I told him about the emails. The messages where Lauren joked about my generosity. The way she painted me as clingy and manipulative for caring. I told him how he repeated those words, how he stood by while people decided who I was without ever asking me. He rubbed his face and said, "I was young. I didn't know how to handle everything." I shook my head. "You were old enough to accept the money. Old enough to get married. Old enough to let me disappear." He said he loved me. That he always had. That things just got complicated. I told him love doesn't erase betrayal. And it doesn't excuse it either. I reminded him that when our parents died, he was a child and I stepped in. I didn't have to. I chose to. I chose him. Over and over. And when he had to choose, when loyalty actually cost him something, he chose Lauren. He chose comfort. He chose silence. That's when he broke. His voice cracked and his eyes filled. He asked me to stop. He said people were already asking questions. That Lauren was upset. That this could ruin everything he'd built. He begged me to just let it go, to protect him one last time. I felt a strange calm settle over me. "I'm not ruining anything," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I'm just telling the truth. If that ruins your life, maybe you built it on lies." He reached for my arm. I stepped back. I told him I wasn't his shield anymore. I wasn't the person who cleaned up messes or stayed quiet so he could feel good about himself. That role ended the moment he decided I was expendable. For a second, he looked like that 10-year-old boy again, scared and lost. Then the moment passed. I got into my car and closed the door. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I didn't need to. As I drove away, my hands were steady on the wheel. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. The confrontation didn't break me. It freed me. The weeks after the event felt strange and quiet, like the air after a storm. My phone started ringing again, but not the way it used to. Aunt Rochelle called first. She didn't ask questions. She didn't doubt me. She just said she was proud of me for finally standing up for myself. After that, other relatives reached out. Some apologized for believing things without checking. Some admitted they'd always felt something was off. I didn't push them. I didn't demand explanations. I let them come at their own pace. Caleb, on the other hand, began to fade from those same circles. Family dinners happened without him. Group chats went silent when he joined. People stopped laughing at his excuses. I didn't celebrate that. I noticed it, and then I let it go. His relationships were no longer my responsibility. Lauren tried to force one last confrontation. She showed up at the hospital during one of my shifts, her face tight with anger. She accused me of humiliating her family, of turning people against them, of playing the victim. I listened long enough to be polite. Then I told her calmly that my workplace wasn't the place for personal drama. I walked away before she could say anything else. I didn't report her. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. That moment felt like a turning point. Not because I won, but because I didn't feel the need to. I started therapy soon after. I told myself it was overdue, not a reaction. Sitting in that quiet room, I talked about my parents, the accident, the years of responsibility I carried without realizing how heavy it was. I talked about guilt, about how love had taught me to disappear. For the first time, I wasn't explaining myself to be understood. I was just speaking to be honest. I learned that survival can look like strength for so long that you forget to ask if you're allowed to rest. In the middle of all that, Bo stayed close. We talked more than we ever had before. Long walks, late dinners, conversations that didn't feel rushed or complicated. We laughed about old memories and admitted how lonely those years had been for both of us. There was no pressure to define anything. Just comfort. Just understanding. One evening, we sat on my porch watching the sky darken. He told me he admired how I handled everything. I told him I was still learning how to handle myself. He smiled and said that was enough. I realized then how different this felt from before. No one needed me to sacrifice. No one needed me to prove my worth. I was allowed to take up space without earning it. I still thought about Caleb sometimes. Not with anger. Not with hope. Just acceptance. Some relationships don't end with closure. They end with clarity. My life felt smaller in some ways. Fewer people. Fewer obligations. But it also felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't living for anyone else. And that felt like peace. The night I hosted my own dinner, the air was warm and still. Nothing fancy. A borrowed folding table, mismatched chairs, string lights I hung myself. I cooked simple food, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about feeling at home in my own space. Aunt Rochelle arrived first, carrying a pie and that familiar knowing smile. Bo came next, rolling up his sleeves without being asked, helping set plates like he belonged there. A few old friends followed, people who knew me before everything got complicated. People who remembered who I was without the labels others tried to give me. We ate slowly. We laughed easily. The kind of laughter that doesn't fill silence, but grows naturally out of comfort. No one asked about Caleb. No one brought up the event or the fallout. They didn't need to. The absence spoke for itself, and it didn't feel heavy anymore. At one point, I stepped back and watched them talk, their voices blending with the sound of crickets and distant traffic. For years, I believed family meant enduring whatever hurt came with it. That love meant carrying weight quietly so others wouldn't have to feel it. Sitting there, I realized how wrong that belief had been. I never got an apology from Caleb. Not a call. Not a message. At first, I thought that might haunt me, that I'd always be waiting for him to acknowledge what he did. But the waiting never came. Somewhere along the way, the need for it faded. I didn't need him to admit anything for it to be true. As the evening went on, Bo caught my eye from across the yard. He smiled in that gentle way that didn't ask anything of me. Just shared the moment. I felt grounded, present, like my feet were finally planted in a life that belonged to me. When the dishes were cleared and the guests lingered a little longer than planned, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph. Not victory. Just understanding. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about tearing someone else down. It wasn't about humiliation or payback. It was about refusing to live inside a lie any longer. About choosing honesty over harmony when harmony required self-erasure. I hadn't burned bridges. I hadn't screamed or exposed or destroyed. I had simply stepped out from under the weight I was never meant to carry alone. And in doing that, I changed the story. Later, after everyone left, I stood alone in the quiet yard. The lights still glowed softly. The chairs sat empty. I felt tired, but it was a good tired. The kind that comes from living instead of surviving. I thought about the girl I was at 17, standing in a hospital hallway, trying to be strong for someone else. I wished I could tell her that one day, she would choose herself without guilt. that she would learn love doesn't demand sacrifice without care. I turned off the lights and went inside, closing the door behind me. This time, I wasn't leaving anything behind. I was finally standing in my own life. Do you think Delaney made the right choice by stepping back and choosing herself? Or should she have kept trying to hold her family together? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. And if stories like this resonate with you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.